What a week it's been. Russian media manipulation networks have been uncovered in the US. Conservative influencers seem to be more influenced by hard Russian cash than principles, it seems. JD Vance has leaked the Trump plan on how he's going to stop the Ukraine war in 24 hours, and it turns out to be an appalling plan to appease Putin and is no different from the plan that Viktor Orban blabbed about 2 months ago. Putin has threatened World War III, but what kind of army does he have? Does he plan to use to fight it? And of course, the big episode, and of course, the big focus for this episode, despite overwhelming evidence of guilt for multiple felonies, is here we go again with Trump, the GOP candidate for president of the United States, who is engaged in a fractious and at times farcical election pitch. But with his criminal guilt, outlandish lies, and amplification of conspiracy theories, the incoherence, the toxicity, and clownishness, will these have any influence on the adherents to the MAGA cult or GOP officials, or will they vote for him anyway? Might he even be replaced after a disastrous election debate? And will those who support Ukraine still canvass for his victory now we are wising up to his disastrous and craven plan to throw Ukraine under the bus? Buckle up. Not all of you will enjoy this. Some will love it, but here we go anyway. Welcome to Silicon Curtain. Please like if you genuinely like this video, and make sure you are subscribed to see more content, fantastic content and speakers that are featured on the channel. Today, I'm joined for the third time by David DeBatto, who is host of the No Delusion podcast. And if you're not subscribed to that, I definitely recommend that you do so. He is a retired US Army counterintelligence special agent, a geopolitical analyst, writer, and podcaster. David is an Iraq war veteran who served as team leader of a tactical human intelligence team in operations within Iraq, and is also a former police officer. David is considered too conservative for the progressive left, too independent-minded for the radical right, and seeks to challenge political dogma and the naked self-interest of politicians. David, welcome back.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
Well, if the intro hasn't already triggered parts of our audience, let's go and see if we can wind them up a little bit more. But you have experience on this. You've been running your No Delusions podcast now for a couple of months. You've had a fantastic set of speakers on the channel, and actually, I'm really pleased to see that that some of those videos have got really, huge audiences and really strong kind of engagement from the audience. What does that experience show you about the sort of bipartisan space and the possibility of creating dialogue between people who are on, traditionally the left or the right?
Well, that's a good question. And yes, thank you. Fortunately, I've gotten a very good response to my relatively new YouTube channel. And I'll be honest, most of the response so far has been from Europe, which is gratifying to me, but I wish we had some more, or I had some more from America, but that's coming. I think more directly to answer your question, there is a sizable number of people out there, especially in the United States, I believe, who are in the middle, who aren't quite sure what to do. They're caught up in this maelstrom, this chaos that the Republican Party, MAGA, has created here in the United States, and they're not quite sure what to make of it. And so channels like yours, for sure, and mine, I hope, can provide some clarity. And I've gotten a lot of compliments about that. I think it's extremely important that we present the truth all the time and counter MAGA and the far right's lies in Europe, specifically, of course, coming from the Kremlin. And I can see where my channel and yours are chipping away at that, and it just can't stop. In fact, with 2 more months or less to the American elections, we need to amplify that message by just exponentially, because we're really up against it. And as I said to you off air, the mainstream media is almost our enemy, seeking false equivalencies between the Republican MAGA party and Donald Trump and the Democrats. There is no false equivalency. The MAGA wants a dictatorship. the Democrats, with all their flaws, and there are many, want to continue our democracy.
And what does it tell you when someone like Dick Cheney has come out and said that he is voting for Kamala Harris? I mean, that's an extraordinary kind of step to take. Obviously, someone like Pompeo is still sort of amplifying absolute out and out lies and conspiracy theories. This is part of the challenge we've got here, isn't it? That for those who are still stuck in a left-right paradigm, for those who cannot bring themselves to vote for Kamala Harris because there are domestic issues on which she stands on, which people, I think, on the right, it does not accord with their principles. And I think it's absolutely fair to have that domestic political debate and say, look, I cannot abide these kind of what are labeled leftist policies. And I think that's perfectly fair on a domestic front. But in terms of Ukraine, it kind of gets muddied and mixed up. And there are people who are almost gaslighting themselves and their audiences by saying, look, we don't know exactly what Trump's going to do. And they've used this line for quite some time to really, I would say, surreptitiously back a GOP win, because that's what they're familiar with. That's what they're comfortable with. Can we have any doubt now about what Trump's plan for Ukraine is? Because J.D. Vance has basically spilled the beans. We had Viktor Orban blabbed about it 2 months ago. It is exactly the same plan now as it was then. And it is, quite frankly, to throw Ukraine under the bus, to give Russia large amounts of Ukrainian sovereign territory, to force Ukraine to concede even more territory, and to prevent it from joining NATO, prevent it from joining the EU and other international institutions, basically serve Ukraine up on a plate to a dictator. That is the plan. People need to stop gaslighting and deluding themselves about it.
Well, you mentioned Dick Cheney giving his endorsement to Kamala Harris. I think far more important than that is the endorsement by Taylor Swift. I'm joking. That's not true. But a big part of America actually, let me actually be half serious about this. Taylor Swift doing that, as comical and as farcical as it is going to sway hundreds of thousands of young voters who go by her every word as MAGA hangs on every word of Trump. So even though I was joking, it's really extremely important, more so actually than Dick Cheney or his daughter giving the endorsement to Kamala Harris. What does it say? It says that the old former Republican Party, the traditional, real Republicans that are still left, and there's not that many of them, are really between a rock and a hard spot. They don't know what to do, and they've waited all this time to decide who to endorse, and most of them haven't, to be honest. And so begrudgingly, some of them have endorsed Kamala Harris, but the vast majority of them have not. Look, the Republican Party is MAGA today. It's the party of Trump. You know that. And they have sold their souls to the devil. And they're going to go down with him no matter what, go down with the ship, the burning, mess that he has created, the chaos that he has created. And they're going to continue to gaslight. They're going to continue to say, well, he didn't really mean that, you misunderstood, or Trump's always joking. You can't take him seriously. Bullshit. He's not joking. He's insane. There's no question about that. But he's not joking. And you mentioned Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation, who wrote it, and J.D. Vance, who's another lunatic, Mr. Cat Lady. They're very serious. They're very serious. And anyone who's read Project 2025 knows how serious and how dangerous this is to America's democracy. It will end America's democracy. And he is serious. And I'll just have to throw this in right now, Jonathan. I believe that Kamala Harris is going to win the election by a sliver, not very much, which is depressing. She should be way ahead, but that's another story. However, I believe if she does win, that may almost be worse than if Trump wins. Why? He's already inciting his MAGA believers to violence. He's already put people in place over the last 3.5 years in every state, in every election office. So if he loses, they're not going to take this lying down. They're going to, in some cases, legally overturn the election. In other cases where they can't, there's going to be sporadic violence at the state level, possibly in Washington, although that'll be a hard target. And I fear that the most. He's not going to take this lying down unless he leaves the country, which he's actually threatened to do. If he loses, I predict violence. I really, really do. If Kamala Harris wins, especially if she wins by a very slim margin.
Well, that's really was going to be one of my questions actually, and it's about the, we had the birther truthers, we have the January the 6th truthers. Never has the word truth been used, perhaps more ironically, and we are no doubt going to have election truthers if Kamala Harris has, whether it's a marginal victory or a substantial victory. There are going to be, claims that this was all false and it didn't really happen. In the end, even with a Kamala Harris victory, is democracy in a kind of long-term lose-lose scenario here?
Unfortunately, I say yes. As you know as well as I do, Jonathan, democracies are very, very fragile. They're extremely hard to create, and they're harder still to maintain. The famous Benjamin Franklin statement during the Constitutional Convention, when he was asked, what kind of a government are you forming? And he said, a republic, if we can keep it. And that's true. I mean, as you know, we're the longest surviving democracy in the world because they're extremely hard to maintain. People like Trump, like MAGA, like the current Republican Party here are vastly more qualified to tear it down. They take advantage of all of the loopholes within a democracy to poke holes in it, to burn it down, which is exactly what they want to do. Trump's famous statement, "I'll become a dictator on day one." Yes, we're in danger. And let me say exactly why I think we're in long-term danger. I alluded briefly to the fact that Kamala Harris was leading Trump, or may win actually by a very slim margin, when she should actually be blowing him out of the water, not because she's not that good, or even though she hasn't divulged all of her policies yet. It's because of the hardcore MAGA support, the hardcore far-right support for Trump. It hasn't budged. In fact, it's increased with all of his indictments and even convictions. When we have a country who is fully 48, 47, 50% for Donald Trump after all he said and done, this does not bode well for our long-term prospects to maintain our democracy.
And one of the other things we're talking about before we sort of came on, and when we're discussing sort of topics for this discussion, is the poisoning of the well, as I think of it. And this is Russia's injection of its narratives, its usefulity, its assets, its agents into not just the US, but the global information system. But if you look at the recent DOJ list, well, they haven't listed the individuals. They've basically said there are 1,300 key influencers or influential media globally that they think are substantially financed by Russia, and therefore those messages are designed to be highly manipulative and inject Russian narratives into our information ecosystem. 800, the vast majority of these, are actually based in the US. So the US seems to be a key target for Russian disinformation. And we have this uncovering of the Tenet media network. Now, this is a so-called right-wing conservative set of voices. We've got to balance this to say it's likely that Russia is injecting this kind of stuff right across the spectrum, but especially the far progressive left and the extreme right. It's going to be creating division, dissension wherever it can. It doesn't care about left, right. It's just weaponizing our own political system and perceptions. But at the moment, those networks that have at least been uncovered and those that are being suspected, there seem to be more of them within the conservative ecosystem than the progressive ecosystem. Is that fair, or do you think Russia's, is not prejudiced in that way?
Russia's prejudiced in every way. Their main goal is to destroy the West, with the U.S. being the prime target here. Let me say something at the outset of my answer to this. Why is this so dangerous, aside from the obvious reasons of Russia infiltrating our mainstream media? I'll go back to 2016 and the first time Trump ran for president and unfortunately won. There were a number of reporters from mainstream media who went out after the election and talked to Trump supporters, the people who had voted for Trump, MAGA people, and told them, and actually held up some documented evidence from the FBI saying, do you realize that many, if not most, of the alleged Trump supporters that you have interacted with for the last 2 years or year or 2 years on social media are actually Russian operatives? They're bots, they're apparatchiks, they're GRU, they're Russian intelligence. Do you realize that we're not corresponding or speaking with real Americans? And you know what the response was from most of the MAGA people who were interviewed? We don't care. We really don't care. If it's Russia, shoulder shrug. We just love Trump. We hate liberals. And if that's what it takes, even working with Russia and Russian intelligence, so be it. That was 8 years ago. It's gotten worse. So I'm not surprised at all, Jonathan, that Russia is able to make such really deep inroads, especially here in the US. And it's almost as bad or arguably worse in Europe. As you know, there's many Russian funded networks in Europe. And it's resulted in all kinds of havoc there. It's not boding well for NATO either, but in the US, which is enemy number one of Russia, I'm not surprised because they are being aided by an ever-increasing number of useful American idiots.
And this, we've discussed this before about also the influence of religion, the distorting lens of religion, people who will have a firm and absolutely, I would say, fine conviction in their own religious belief, but that can distort their perception of other things relate to it. They can agree, let's say, with Russian narratives because it would seem to reinforce and agree with their sort of religious values, even though you and I know that the Russian church, the Russian Orthodox Church under the Moscow Patriarch is little more than a sort of KGB founded intelligence operation, an influence operation. The challenge here, of course, is that as in religions, those who are more moderate find it very difficult to challenge the radicals and the grifters on the extreme ends. And of course, all we tend to hear about is the actions and opinions of those radicals and grifters, and it puts into disrepute those who hold more moderate views. We constantly, berate Muslims, for instance, especially moderate Muslims, that they should be doing more to tackle the extremism and to not normalize the extremism. Is there a similar problem in the conservative ecosystem and indeed in the far left ecosystem, that those who are moderates, far too few of them challenge this sort of the radicals, the grifters, and the assets and agents of Moscow? And actually more needs to be done if we're actually going to tackle this problem seriously.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I'll start with the far right because I'm sorry, they're the bigger problem. Here in the United States, it's the evangelicals who are in the spotlight for that. They are arguably the strongest and most powerful group supporting Donald Trump. And I guess to directly answer your question, there's a huge war going on right now within the evangelical community here in the United States because of just what you said. Some of the more moderates, which, believe it or not, there are moderates within the evangelical community, are trying to rein in their more radical brothers and sisters and tell them that this is not the way. This is not the teachings of Jesus. This is not even the teachings of the evangelical church. And they're having a real hard time because they're being elbowed out by, as you said, the more vocal minority, and they're almost being forced to go along, get along to go along. And that's a war. Like I said, that's an out and out war going on right now, specifically within the evangelical community, but in general within the Christian community here in the United States, whether it's the Catholic Church, the Presbyterians, Anglicans, whatever. There's a real big battle going on right now. But unfortunately, I have to say that the moderates are losing because the elected officials, the so-called conservative elected officials, and they don't exist anymore, they're radical. The Republican elected officials are not having any of it, meaning they're not having any of the moderate religious beliefs that they did in the past. So they're just espousing the radical beliefs. They are encouraging radical beliefs within the Christian church. And with all the televangelists on social media spouting this hate, it's really hard for any moderates to even get a word in. Talking about the left, I have to say that, yeah, there's a similar problem there. I don't know how familiar your British or European listeners are to what's called the Squad. This is a group of democratic, very liberal, progressive elected officials in the House of Representatives. And they propose most of the very radical left, some would call socialist ideas here in the United States. Some of them for open immigration, open borders, which, as you know, is a huge issue with the MAGA people right now. They were at least for defunding the police, an insane issue or stand that I was vehemently against from the beginning. And other very progressive, socialist, and sometimes wrong-headed beliefs and proposals. So that just gives ammunition to the far right when they try to oppose the left. They want to paint all Democrats as these radical socialists and what they call Marxists now. In the debate, Trump, if you remember, called Kamala Harris a Marxist many, many times. So that just gives them fuel for this argument. So there's a problem here on the ultra left, the ultra right, similar to what happened in the elections in Germany. Both the far left and the far right won. I just did a podcast on that. That's a major problem. And it's a major problem here in the US. And it just adds to the chaos that, to circle back, the chaos that the Russian intelligence services are very much trying to create here in the United States. And so far, I think they're succeeding beyond their wildest dreams.
And it's a perfect environment. This sort of discord, division, distrust is the perfect environment for Russian propaganda. And whereas some of the Squad may genuinely believe in that, and they're not necessarily influenced by outside forces, just in the way that many in the GOP hold genuine beliefs that are not informed by Russia. It's so easy for us to label people as being Russian agents. The trouble is there are many news type influencers and media constructs that we really do suspect are getting funds from Russia. This isn't a direct accusation. This is a suspicion, just in case they're litigious, but something like the gray zone on the more conspiratorial left. I mean, when you see Russian narratives parroted almost word for word on a regular basis, that's where at least I start to get extremely suspicious of news outlets.
Absolutely. And you briefly mentioned Tenants Media, which has been in the news recently. They've been indicted by the FBI as being a Russian front, a Russian-funded media agency. And the 4 or 5 main pundits, I hate to call them journalists, they're not, claimed, of course, that they are victims of this Russian propaganda, which, of course, is nonsense. Because as you just said, they regularly parroted word for word Kremlin lies and propaganda. And when you see this on the far right, when you see this on the far left, it's obvious to anyone with a brain that this is coming directly from Russia. Now, unfortunately, these are not all paid informants or apparatchiks by the Kremlin. These are people who are deluded. Sometimes they truly believe this, or at least they think they believe it because they've heard it so often. And their elected officials, at least in this country, say it so often that they believe that this is true. And they want to tear down democracy. They want to aid the Kremlin, even though they don't know or they don't think that they're helping the Kremlin to do that. And in my mind, that's actually far more dangerous than the paid apparatchiks of the Kremlin.
It's also a suspicion that's been growing on me here, and a lot of people have been sort of discussing this. And this is perhaps the hard wiring of the legacy media, the traditional media, which unfortunately is very much plugged into the left-right paradigm. It seeks out those things that divide people rather than the common ground, because that's what makes more compelling television. That's what you can pack into the small sort of sound bites, not these hour-long kind of conversations, but the little sort of 2 or 3 minutes that are actually allowed for in news reports. And that actually the mainstream media is geared towards division, trauma, and despair. And also it's geared to the normalization of toxicity, lies, and hate in politics, because that's a kind of clickbait. That's the broadcast equivalent of what we see happening in online algorithms, YouTube, Twitter, etc., which are definitely geared towards the clickbait effect. But that battle for attention also seems to be driving mainstream media into, I would say, an extremely destructive form of long-term behaviors.
I can't agree with you more, Jonathan. And what's amazing to me is since that kind of clickbait behavior, which reinforces rage and controversy and wants more of that, okay, fine. Well, why don't they take that controversy and rage inducing reporting and use it against the far right, who, I'm sorry, they are the most destructive force right now in the Western world. Specifically, I'll talk about the United States because that's where I live. They are destroying this country. Whether or not they win the next election, lose the next election, they have done so much to erode Americans' belief in democracy, belief in the Constitution, belief in the very media that it may be beyond repair. I hope not. I'm going to do whatever little I can to try to prevent that. But if they want to prevent or create controversy and clickbait and make more revenue, okay, attack the right. When they lie, don't say, well, it's a misleading, it's a lie. Donald Trump just lied. He told something that was an obvious lie. He said this before. It's been fact checked a billion times, and he's repeating it. Not only that, the Speaker of the House is repeating it. All of the elected officials within the Republican Party are repeating it. This is very destructive for our democracy. And right about that, because we've got less than 2 months to save our democracy. It's that serious. And if the mainstream media wants to play false equivalencies, then they are an apparatchik. They are contributing to the demise of our democracy. And I don't think that's what our founders had in mind when they talked about a free press. They didn't think they should be free to aid in destroying our democracy by creating false equivalencies with traitors. The Republican Party of the United States right now are traitors. They still believe that the January 6th insurrectionists were on a peaceful demonstration. They have said that up till yesterday. They are traitors. There's no other way to say it. And the mainstream media needs to say this. They need to either get behind democracy or they need to get behind dictatorships. There's no middle ground anymore. Sorry.
It seems like an age ago, but just a month ago, we were in some degree of panic because Trump, certainly the perception was that his lies were a lot stronger in the first presidential debate than Biden's truth, which he expressed in a very weak and faltering way. Of course, he stepped aside. What do you think would have happened if he hadn't? And what is the kind of energy that's been injected into the process? Because Kamala Harris is younger, she's far more dynamic than her role as VP would have maybe suggested. She has a strong personality, and she does seem to really be starting to get a handle on how to, project strength and leadership through the media. Where will we have been? And actually, you've said that the risk is still on a knife edge, in fact, despite Biden stepping down.
If Biden had not stepped down, the Democrats would have lost the election 100% in a big landslide. It would have been a disaster. And I'm still angry at Biden for not stepping aside much, much sooner. He did perhaps or inflicted perhaps a mortal wound on democracy. And I've followed Joe Biden for 40 plus years, the whole time he's been in government, from state rep to the Senate to vice presidency and to the presidency. And so I like Joe Biden, but this was stubbornness. This was pure ego. And like I said, it may still doom our democracy. He should have stepped aside, much sooner. Time will tell whether or not it was not soon enough. Is the danger still here? I've already alluded to the fact that it is. If Joe Biden had stepped aside sooner, Kamala Harris would have, of course, gone on the campaign trail. She would have been righteously or legitimately crowned in the Democratic convention as the candidate. The American public would have gotten to know her much better. That's one of the main complaints of the Republicans. We don't know her. What are her policies? What is she really like? That would have been all gone. And you're right. There is, at least with people like myself, a feeling that there is at least a chance that we can salvage this democracy with Kamala Harris. And I was euphoric when Joe Biden finally stepped aside and she came forward. I'm still very, very excited. I'm optimistic. As I said, I believe she will win, even though perhaps by a slim margin. But if she had not stepped in, if Joe Biden had not stepped aside, he would have lost by a landslide. There would be no question that our democracy would have been over in November. There's no question in my mind at all. Right now, in my opinion, we have a chance that we wouldn't have had before.
And that is incredibly important. And the other area to tackle, of course, and this is one where Biden is still president, and there is some debate about whether this is a lame duck season or whether he's actually going to do something constructive. This podcast is very much focused on Ukraine, on foreign policy, as opposed to domestic policies. We won't touch those. That's for other formats to dive into and other experts. But on foreign policy, Biden has shown himself to be extremely timid, extremely cautious. He and the kind of people he surrounds himself with, like Jake Sullivan, have an extreme managerial mindset. They have not, let's be frank, they have not embraced the idea of Ukrainian victory. They have not articulated what that victory would be. They have not in any way expressed what kind of Russia they want to see and how it's supposed to get there. Rather, that is all covered up by what is increasingly shown to be a fig leaf of a phrase, which is for as long as it takes. Well, Ukraine doesn't have infinite material, infinite people. So for as long as it takes is almost a slogan for long, slow defeat as opposed to victory. The Joe Biden you've observed over 40 years, has he always had these qualities, or have they become sort of amplified? And indeed, have they been exacerbated by Russia very effectively using what it's very good at, which is nuclear threat, coercive manipulation, not just injecting this sort of stuff into our media environment, but actually also heavily influencing some of these so-called geopolitical analysts and experts?
Well, I'll answer the last part of the question first. It's all of the above as far as Joe Biden. Yes, he's always been this way, cautious. And I think that, yes, he's become more so in latter years, and he's adapted to, in his way, the environment. Joe Biden is a classic case of a Cold Warrior, or a product of the Cold War. He still believes in his mind, whether he admits this or not, that he's talking to the Soviet Union. And that he's dealing with the Soviet Union, and he has to deal with them in the same way that he did 30 or 40 years ago. Look, I'm going to briefly allude to an article that was written in Newsweek that I wrote, did a podcast on a couple of months ago, and that was, and it was very well sourced. It was talked about the director of the FBI, Burns, who went to the Kremlin to meet with the Kremlin leaders and Putin about 2 months before the full-scale invasion in 2022. This would have been December of 2021. And again, this was a very well-sourced story. According to the sources that Newsweek had, Burns and the Kremlin, he actually talked with Putin via phone, he was in Sochi, I believe, agreed that they would allow, the United States would allow Russia to invade Ukraine if they promised that they would go no further. And if they did not go any further, the United States promised that they would not employ NATO troops, they would not employ the most serious weapons for Ukraine, and that would allow them to occupy all of Ukraine if they promised just to agree to Cold War rules. Again, you can believe this, you cannot believe this. A lot of people don't. I tend to believe it based on what's happened over the last 2.5 years. And if that's true, that's a disgrace. That's an unbelievable disgrace that we will never live down. You put that together with the fact that, as I said, Joe Biden is a product of the Cold War, and he has, since the beginning of at least the full-scale invasion, adhered to Cold War rules. And no, and as you've interviewed Ben Hodges several times, I have as well a couple of times, and he says, look, we don't have a strategic vision. We haven't even articulated what the end result is going to be. What do we want in Ukraine? Do we want them to win? Do we want them to lose? Do we want Russia to be taken apart and have a new government? We haven't said anything. All we keep saying is that tired expression, for as long as it takes, which means nothing, and I hope I never hear that again. Jake Sullivan is a disgrace. I'm sorry. He's the main architect of this, and it's just deadly for Ukraine until and unless we, the United States and NATO, articulate what our end goal is for Ukraine, which should be victory and the total destruction of the Russian military, and we provide them with the tools to do that. This war is unknown. The outcome of this war will be unknown, and it could go very, very badly against Ukraine. So I'm sorry to have to say that, but we have let Ukraine down. We're giving them as long as it takes one more bloody day after one more bloody day.
And this is an incredible challenge, isn't it? Well, I'll cut that because yeah, I know what I was going to say. I'll cut that a little bit. And this is absolutely clear as well, isn't it? In Ukraine's lightning Kursk counteroffensive, they've deployed the art of surprise and secrecy. They've really leveraged planning and strategy, as well as the training that they've got from NATO over these years, to create this incredible campaign that has put immense pressure on Russia politically and militarily, and of course psychologically, which is important. How crucial is the fact that they didn't just hide this from their adversaries, they hid it from their allies as well?
It's crucial. I think it's the main reason it succeeded. In addition to the bravery and ingenuity of the Ukrainian high command and the Ukrainian military. Look, they didn't thumb their nose at United States exactly, but they did hide it from the United States, and they should have, because I'm sure Biden and Jake Sullivan would have said, "Oh, no, you can't do that. Escalation." So they didn't listen to that, and look what's happened. It's just. It's a fiasco for Russia, I believe, and many analysts, and as well as Ben Hodges and others, that this could be or is a turning point in the war. It embarrassed Putin to the extreme. Since 1945, Russia hasn't been invaded by a foreign army. Well, they are now, and they're unable to turn them back, to kick them out. It's been over a month since the Ukrainians entered Russian territory and seized approximately 1,000 kilometers of territory. They are still there. They're digging in. It looks like they're going to be there for the long run. And Russia keeps sending draftees, conscripts, and not their best forces against Ukraine, and they've been decimated. They have sent some of their forces, even some special ops people, and they've been decimated. So it doesn't look as if Russia is going to be able to dislodge the Ukrainians anytime soon. What a black eye for Putin. The Russian people are still shrugging their shoulders because they don't know what to say, and if they do, they'll get arrested. But this is the beginning of major unrest in Russia. It's just going to take a lot longer than all of us would hope for.
Something has to change, doesn't it? I'm going to tie in one of your answers there about the Cold War thinking, because I think this is absolutely crucial to understand Jake Sullivan. There are some people on the Ukrainian side and the activist side who say he's a Russian agent. Well, I think he's clearly not. I mean, that is a fairly ludicrous assertion, but he is highly influenced by actions and behaviors of Russia in a way that certainly is, I think, their intent, and he doesn't realize it. So if we take this Cold War thinking and we take the current debate that's going on about ATACMS and Storm Shadow, it's looking more likely that Storm Shadow may get approval for usage, but ATACMS will not, because the US, one, is trying to distance itself from direct involvement, but secondly, every time this happens, we are signaling, we're lighting a big neon sign saying, this is what we're about to do. Now, that is very definitely a hangover from the Cold War, but it's not the way, is it, to actually execute a military conflict that you want to win.
No, you're absolutely right. They're just acting as if this is the Cold War, when the US and the then Soviet Union coordinated many, many things behind the scenes that we didn't know about. And they, again, played by the rules of the Cold War. There were actually pretty hard and fast rules because you were dealing with a regime that actually had an ideology, and they stuck to that ideology for the most part. We're dealing with a criminal terrorist regime right now. They have no ideology other than greed and imperial ambitions and genocide. They don't care about Cold War rules or any rules. International law be damned. And yet we, specifically the United States, and to a lesser degree, the NATO nations, are behaving as if this is the Soviet Union, as if they're getting on the red phone to call the Kremlin and discuss some serious issue. No, that's gone. That's long gone. You're dealing with a criminal. You're dealing with an indicted international war criminal. And he doesn't care about Cold War thinking. And you're right. We telegraph everything that we do. We are allowing them to dictate the narrative, which is insane. You cannot fight a war that way and win. You can fight a war that way and lose, but you can't fight a war that way and win. Ukraine's learned that from us, unfortunately, and they're not playing by those rules anymore. Thank God, and God bless them. We are. And I don't know if that's going to stop. I was going to say that's got to stop. Yes, if we want them to Ukraine to win the war, that has to stop. I just don't think, I know under the Biden administration until at least 20 January, that's not going to stop. And a lot of innocent Ukrainians, both military and civilian, are going to die or be severely wounded. A lot of Ukrainian infrastructure is going to be destroyed, and it's all needless.
And of course, there's the election dynamic in there as well. There's the fear that if Ukraine makes some sudden move or Russia collapses or goodness knows what they're imagining, but if that happens prior to the November vote, that could somehow gift Trump, some kind of point. And I've had many people in the channel telling me that, I just don't understand internal US politics. This is sensible. Biden's doing this so that, he doesn't prejudice the campaign. I point back, do these people not see the moral bankruptcy, the absolute bankruptcy of that point of view? That for domestic political advantage, someone is going to normalize the idea of letting hundreds of Ukrainians be slaughtered, military and civilian. The absolute, it's appalling. And it's a disgrace, and it shows a sheer disconnect with basic humanity.
Well, it plays right into the MAGA narrative, though, Jonathan, because MAGA doesn't believe we should have any international alliances. We shouldn't protect anybody. We shouldn't come to the aid of anyone, democracies or not, unless, of course, they've paid us bribes. As Trump tried to elicit from Zelensky, which resulted in his first impeachment. But other than that, no, MAGA doesn't believe we should support them, which is why they want us to pull all of our support out of Ukraine. Look, in a normalized moral democracy, it would be a no-brainer. We have to support Ukraine. They are a fledgling democracy. They have done so much in the last, since they've been a democracy, 30 plus years, that we have to support them, not to mention that it is very clear that Putin, if victorious in Ukraine, will not stop in Ukraine. He's made that plain. He can't say it any clearer. So this is a national security issue for the United States and obviously for Europe. And we're dithering. We're making it sound, at least MAGA is, as if it's being fought on the far side of the moon. And it is absolutely irrelevant to us. That's ostrich thinking to the nth degree. And it's foolish, it's ridiculous, and it's very, very dangerous.
David, thank you for your strong and clear words. Thank you for once again joining the channel. And I'll just finish up by once again saying to people that links to your podcast and your various publications are going to be in the description of the video. I strongly recommend they check those out. But for now, thank you.
I enjoyed it, Jonathan, as always. Thank you.